That's great. So welcome very much to this session. As I mentioned, we're slightly adjusting it um, uh, as one of our slots doesn't appear to be able to make it today. But I think it's going to be great because it will give our presenters some time to talk about their work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Verena Roberts from the University of Calgary, who will be talking about OEP to expand high school learning environments, spaces, and experiences. Over to you, Verena.
Thank you so much, Martin. And first, I want to say thank you for all the work that ALT has done and everyone around the world. This is so exciting to be here today and very appreciated and very positive in this time of unprecedented events. So this is based on my research that I completed last year with high school students who are 15-year-olds or secondary students. And this is, I think, the most influential quote here in the corner. Real learning isn't done behind walls or with boundaries. I believe that the real learning begins when we are left to figure something out, to problem solve, to collaborate and discuss with people of experience. It's about doing and what can be learned from the experience. And I hope you hear some foundational philosophers in that kind of quote, because it will give you an idea of what we're going to learn about today. A very early start in Alberta. Yes, it is. This is some of the current and foundational literature that I used, and you can see the foundational on the bottom in terms of theory and philosophy, like Vygotsky, Dewey, Barth, Scardamalia, and Bereder. And I really want to emphasize Scardamalia and Bereder and Barth because they're people that you really don't hear about, especially in higher ed contexts. On the top, you'll see a number of people that we have heard about before, like Kouros, Knoll, Jenkins, possibly Ito, possibly Drexler, Cronin, possibly Greenhow, and Boyd. Now, yesterday I was lucky enough to do this presentation for the GoGN network, and one of the questions came up was, where did I come up with the construct of the idea of open learning? And in my literature review, I literally had to review open learning, open pedagogy, open educational practices, open education, and open educational resources to come up with the framework that we'll be discussing today. So I came up with an initial framework that guided my research. But you'll see on the left, it's integrating ideas from multiple perspectives, education without barriers, learners can find, consider, and share knowledge, facilitated by the teacher, extends and builds upon socioculture and connectivist learning, safe in terms of data privacy and well-being, student-centered learning, and collaboration and interaction with multiple mentors and nodes of learning. My research questions were, what are the students' and teachers' perspectives of open learning? So they had to develop awareness. To what extent does OEP expand learning opportunities? And how does an open learning design intervention support teachers in designing for learning? So I completed my research through 4 different projects, and I called these projects learning pathways. We started at the bottom, as you could see, focused on how do I search and communicate online, which emphasized digital literacy skills, and we expanded into who is my online audience, how do I solve a community problem, and what is my story and how does my story inform my identity. It's important to note that all of these projects took place over a 5-month span. Now this is the final open learning design intervention, and it emphasizes how we think about open readiness, open educational practices, the foundation and infrastructure to support open learning. And this comes about as a result of emphasizing reflections throughout the whole entire process in different ways. And it goes through in stages that integrate into each other. So the first stage is building relationships, the second stage is co-designing learning pathways, the third stage is building and sharing knowledge, and the fourth stage is building personal learning networks. And what I want to emphasize here is you don't see those magic letters OER here, because in no way do you absolutely need OER to consider open educational practices in K-12 or, I believe, context. Reflections took place, as you could see, throughout the project. So the primary source of data collection were participant reflections, to the point that my high school students were saying, please do not make us reflect anymore. Reflections also were demonstrated through the visitor and resident maps. So we use them throughout the 5 months. We use them at the beginning. Visitor and resident maps by White and DeCornu. And you can see where students perceived they were learning and with what digital tools and with whom they felt or they perceived they were learning. We also reflected in online environments like blogs. So this was one of the students decided to create, this gives you a concept of my world, a sign-in sheet that was online so everybody could share the outdoor hockey rinks, because the little guys never got to go on and the big guys kept pushing them off. And then you can see they had to talk about what the problem was and why this was important to them. Another way we reflected was by collaborating and presenting together at conferences online and in face-to-face environments. And this is the name of my teacher, because part of this research ensured that the teacher did not want to be anonymous. So his name is Mark Turner. All the students did remain anonymous, but they also collaborated and presented with me at the end. And finally, the reflections were also in numerous media artifacts, including videos. Stage 1 is all about safe learning spaces, and the irony is not lost on me in this age when I think of the time and dedication we put into thinking about what do safe learning spaces look like in open online environments, things like freedom to choose what you want to learn and how you want to learn it. And these are quotes directly from the students. They describe what the safe learning spaces look like for them. People can gather information and resources without feeling threatened, which is interesting. Relaxed and stress atmosphere. Like today, we talk about being in our pajamas. People are honest with each other. People have a choice about how they participate, and people can share and listen to multiple perspectives. Most importantly, failure and risk-taking is encouraged and recognized. And you can see here that there are stages to the being able to share, or the open readiness. So the stages of the relationship building depended on how much trust and how safe the students felt in their confidence. So they first had to start with a relationship with themselves. And as we all know, 15-year-olds have difficulty thinking about themselves and their own identity. And then we have immediate community, outer community, and network. The reference is me. Stage 2 is co-designing learning pathways. And what does this mean is you need to tell the students so you need to have that relationship with the students in order to understand how you can be responsive in the learning design and develop personal learning context. Negotiation of epistemological choice. Students, when they're in a world where they don't know what is going on, or they feel that what you are doing is very different from a learning perspective, they just want to know, what are you doing? What is this open learning thing? Why is it different from other ways to learn? So that awareness of ways of knowing is extremely important when thinking about open learning. And it's developing multiple communication skills and digital multi-transliteracy skills. And finally, the most important part are identifying roles and responsibilities, the project management, goal setting, and criteria and assessment. Stage 3 is building and sharing knowledge. So as you'll see, it's not until stage 3 that we actually see evidence of students building and sharing what we have perceived as knowledge or products in any capacity. And this is where students demonstrate clear and transparent evidence of learning throughout their learning pathway. How are they sharing their learning? Who are they sharing their learning with, and understanding that they might share their learning anonymously. So Cronin talks about sharing your learning with and as. So are they an anonymous sharer, or are they sharing their learning through their identity? Which identity are they sharing their learning with? Evidence of designing for sharing. So they think about what they're making and creating ahead of time so they know they can share it with people. Evidence of student learning experiences in terms of what kind of environments they go into and what kind of environments they feel comfortable with, and evidence of student use of outside resources and nodes of learning. This is an example of all the different places in which the students demonstrated their learnings, informal and formal boundary crossings. And you'll see the student in the middle and their immediate, I guess, zone of people that they feel safest with are the teacher, the learner, and friends from inside and outside their class. But then what's really important, it came out of this research, and you'll see that this image kind of looks like a tree. And the reason it looks like a tree is because we are rooted to our community and our land in Canada, as we would say, and our place. And so the little learner finds it just as important to connect to local community, family, their religious community, their passion and interest in local community, sports, music, and photography, as those cloud-based and those exciting things that happen on the internet, like gaming, streaming services, closed and open digital passion, blogs, Wattpad. So you can see that the learners have like a space rooted into the ground, so that non-digital open learning examples as well as the digital open learning examples. And we definitely think of open learning as a continuum. So we develop our learners from a cocoon stage, and they develop into butterflies, as we well know. So up to age 11, we call this the teacher-led walled garden of open exploration. And then they transition between the teacher-led walled garden and independent open learning. And finally, they develop their own personal learning networks. And what's interesting here is when I consider my graduate online learners right now at my university, I have some learners that exhibit the same behaviors as my up to age 11-year-olds, and what I call emerging open readiness learners. And those are learners where the teacher, I have to connect my own personal learning network in order to support them in figuring out how to share and how to step beyond the boundaries of those classroom walls. And then, as I say, the transition is where they either rely upon me and my personal learning network, and they transition into developing their own personal learning networks. So this is a model of all of the research, and you see the learner is in the center. And then when we talked about open learning at the very beginning, there's essential conditions of open learning. There's open educational practices and open learning awareness that support the instructor and the student in contextualizing learning and finding personal relevancy, connecting and interacting with multiple nodes of learning, considering multiple perspectives, contextualizing learning through feedback, and contributing to community. All the while, they're always sharing their ideas and knowledge with others, as long as they're in safe learning spaces, as long as they have built those relationships. It just reminds me of when I first came to Twitter and I wasn't ready to share anything with others or even speak out until I had developed those relationships with others. Now, finally, the principles of open learning design in any learning context. So we have, these are the principles that came out of all the research at the end. Open learning is dependent upon the opportunities for learners to co-design personally relevant learning pathways. And my research now emphasizes and examines what does co-design look like in any learning environment. And in my case right now, again, I'm working with graduate students and not K-12 15-year-olds. Learners collaboratively and individually share their learning experiences through open and closed feedback loops. And it's essential that these feedback loops actually occur. When we don't have any interaction, that's when the learning kind of disappears and people struggle. And again, we'll use like the Twitter example. When people don't answer people, they lose motivation and engagement. Learners need to transparently demonstrate their learning in meaningful ways that integrate curriculum and competencies. And it's not just about content-driven, discipline-driven content. It's about the integration of the soft skills and what we call the hard skills. Open learning occurs through stages and continuums and is a personally relevant learning experience that transcends formal learning environments, and open learning emphasizes the learning process in order to build upon and share community knowledge. And that is it. I'm not sure how many minutes that was.
In normal conditions, you'd be bang on.
Oh, well, that's what I'm praying for. There you
go. We've got some nice reflections in the chat there. If everyone has a question they'd like to ask, feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you presenter rights. So which will enable your microphone, or please feel free to use the chat as well.
Tessie, and I see did you like the 3 stages? Did you choose the age groups? It is for prior research, but it's also based on what students are allowed to use in terms of social media. So when they're allowed to actually sign up for things, that was where I primarily got that information from, as well as Greenhouse. How could you apply? Yeah, I was fascinated with the fact that everything I did in this research I've applied into my graduate online learning course, and I haven't had any changes or difference. Why stage 2 isn't second 3? Maybe I have to study something. Let's go back to the which Clara, do you mean? Okay, let's go back. Why stage 2 isn't a second 3? Ah, that's interesting. It's mostly about the planning and organizing and the sharing. Oh, after sharing knowledge, we could design pathways. But the confidence building and the trust had to be developed. Yeah, so they weren't willing to share. The students were not willing to share at all, or maybe building could be in stage 2, but the amount of time it required to get a 15-year-old to share themselves was interesting. And so then it was like, how do we encourage them to share, knowing that they always have a choice not to share? Like I did all this knowing the caveat is you always have the choice not to share. You don't have to be open, obviously. There's always plan B. But what's interesting is adults do the same thing. So they go through the stages in the same way. They don't want to share. You have to slowly support them in thinking about why they would want to share, how they would want to share, who they would want to share as, what they want to share, that kind of thing. And the other thing is, if as an instructor you don't have your own personal learning network, that was part, I would say, a limitation of my research. Then what would you do? You'd have to, I think, build with your students as you go. But I had my own personal learning network, so therefore I could support them. Co-designing learning is quite linear. It's organization. Oh, sorry, Martin.
Liz Drew's got a question there. PLN sound interesting for this age group.
A PLN for this age, for any age group. So if you're a kindergarten teacher, for example, it would be you and your kindergarten class. So how do all of you have your own personal learning network? So if we see kindergarten, which are 5-6-year-olds, for example, they believe they have a personal learning network, especially people who connect with them with their blogs or their social media from around the world. Or also, it's not just digital, as I mentioned, it's those community based supporters. So people who come in, there's the mothers where they come in with their babies, and so you learn about how a baby grows. That's another example of face-to-face open learning. That's where their PLN is that mother and that baby, for example. So it's a group mentality PLN. Although if they saw them on the street, they would think they were part of their PLN. They would say, you know, I know them. They're connected to my. The way they would draw it or perceive it is they're connected in their personal learning environment. I think that's it.
Just one final question. In fact, I've got a question from Marcela.
Marcel, this was based on one particular group. However, now I'm speaking a year later. And yeah, Liz, it's a caring environment, exactly. And I have applied this idea of the open learning design intervention into graduate classes and undergraduate classes. And so it's now with adults. So yeah, it's at a university institution. So yes, it's worked in both contexts. And tomorrow I speak to that. Martin, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, do you think, given the current global situation, do you just see learners moving through these stages more rapidly as they kind of are enforced into kind of remote self-directed learning in many cases?
And it's completely dependent upon if the teachers and instructors develop those relationships. I think that's in any context, right? But if the emphasis is on product or content, you're not as likely to go through these stages because you haven't developed the trust in order to figure out why you would want to share anything in the first place. But also the reflective part, and that's why I emphasize that today. We need to spend more time thinking about how we can support our learners in thinking about reflective practices. Even if you have 200 students in your class, it doesn't mean you need to mark every reflective blog or like it's thinking about how do we support reflection, because that was the most successful for the students in figuring out and why they would want to share, why they would want to become an open learner, or why they don't want to be an open learner, but at least they've developed that awareness.
Well, thank you for that, Verena. So, as you mentioned, I think you're around the conference for tomorrow as well. So people can look up the program for that as well. So if we could just show our appreciation in a virtual way to